Whoa, what an amazing day. So I am blessed and honored this morning to get to introduce to you the amazing Suzanne Giesemann. She's a retired U.S. Navy commander who has served as a commanding officer, an intelligence officer, and she was aide to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff on 9/11. She is now a messenger of hope, an evidential medium, and teacher of the awakened path, a path to knowing who you are and why you're here. Suzanne has authored 12 books and has a weekly radio show on Unity Radio every Thursday afternoon. The story of Suzanne's transition from Navy commander to medium and spiritual teacher is amazing. So let's all welcome the messenger of hope, Suzanne Giesemann.
Thank you. You haven't even heard me talk yet. What are you doing? Good afternoon, everybody. Gosh, I'm happy to be back here. It was 5 years ago this month that I came out of the closet and came up here and admitted that I understood. I talked about what I called the miracle of Christ consciousness. That's my talking about coming out of the closet, because for me, having been raised by two agnostic parents with no spiritual religious background whatsoever, that was a big revelation for me to understand that the spirit that flows through me is the same one that's flowing through you. That is basically the Christ consciousness, knowing that I am that. So the name of the talk this morning is supposed to be Beyond the Story, and it will be, but it's kind of funny because my story as a Navy commander has me very trained to prepare very well, especially for talks and presentations. So in the past, I would write out every word if I had to do a message like today. And then I might memorize it. I'm not going to read it, but memorizing it, and it wouldn't really have that freshness. So then I proceeded to just outline things, and then I'd memorize the outline, or I'd have it propped up on the front seat so I could look at it. You know, always have that little prop. That was the story. And so this week I prepared to talk about Christ consciousness and about Advent and about having faith. And I got up this morning, left the Villages, Florida, where I live, at 6 a.m., got on the road real early so I could get here early enough to have time to make sure I had that outline of what I was going to talk about just cemented in my mind. And on the way as I'm driving, this little voice started speaking to me. And I know you'd recognize that voice because it's the same voice that's in all of us. But this voice said to me, "What are you afraid of?" And they were very right. This was a very unfamiliar feeling I was having about worrying about what I was going to say, because for the past couple years, I don't even worry about it. I just let the power that flows through all of us speak through. And just as I had that thought, I felt this little tickle in my hair. And then I felt it again back here. And I smiled and I turned to the right, the seat in my car, because I knew that that tickle has been the repeated sign from my friend Brenda Baker, who passed to spirit in May. And she has been dropping in on me consistently in her voice. My dear friend has not gone anywhere, but she announces her presence. It feels like there's a little bug in my hair. And I turned, and she's in this right-hand seat as I'm driving down 275, and she says, "Thelma and Louise." Like, "Girl, we're here on a ride, and I'm riding beside you." And then I said, "I have to get there. I have to get ready for this talk." And she looked at me, and in my mind's eye, held up my notes and threw them out the window. So I said, "Yeah, I get it. I got this." And so that story has hindered a lot of us. But if we have a story, then there must be something beyond the story, because I know that Christ consciousness means we're far more than the story. So there are two aspects of us, and we get to choose which aspect goes in the forefront at any time. And that's where we find peace. It becomes a matter of paying attention to when you have that little clenching in your gut. When something's just not quite right, you're in the story. Because fear is the opposite of love. Have you heard that been said before? And it didn't always make sense to me. I say, well, the opposite of love is hate or anger. But really, when you understand what true love is, I'm not talking emotional love, I'm talking divine love. Divine love is the absence of separation. And so when we pay attention to these bodies and to our story, our background, our history, our biography, then we're all separate from each other. And that's very real, and that's how we manifest the Christ consciousness in this world, through the stories. There's nothing wrong with the stories, but when they keep us feeling separate from each other, that's when it divides us. And so we can always change our point of view, shift a little higher to that view of the light, the true self, the soul, where all of us are united as one divine mind, one light. I can look out here and see a bunch of apparently separate vehicles, bodies, the vehicle for the soul. But then I can just shift my focus and see nothing but light. And if all of us could see that light, how it would change our world, and how it has changed my world in just the past 9 years to discover there is a greater world, and to communicate very clearly with those who inhabit that world. So I want to share with you one very true story to help you see how we are souls right now. Not when you pass to the other side. You're a soul now communicating at a whole different level than this earthly realm. And the story I'll share with you happened when I gave a reading about a year ago to a woman named Cheryl. She's allowed me to share her story. She wanted to hear from the love of her life, who had passed a few months before our reading. And so I knew nothing about him, but I asked her loved ones in spirit to draw near so I could feel them. It's a merging of the light, the consciousness. And I said, well, I'm sensing a man. He tells me his name is Jim. He has a cancerous feeling. He's talking about hospice. Oh my God, is he funny? This guy was like, I said, he's Robin Williams funny. And I said, he's saying right now, I'm not ready to be pushing up the weeds yet. And I thought, well, that's funny because I'm talking to his soul here. And then he gave me the name Gary, and he gave me another name, Gary. He said it twice. He showed me that he worked with tools on truck engines. And then he gave me a very important message for Cheryl, which I'll save till the end of this story. But she sat there looking at me and she said, Suzanne, this doesn't make sense because I have an Uncle Jim, the first name he gave me, who has cancer now. He's in hospice now. His son is Gary, and Gary's son is Gary. So everything lined up, and she said, he is definitely Robin Williams funny. But Suzanne, he's not dead yet. And I said, but you said he's in hospice. How about the truck engine part? She said he owns a truck mechanic place. This is Jim's soul. I said, could he have passed in the last hour? She said, well, it's possible. And so I checked with Jim, and that's when he repeated, I'm not ready to be pushing up the weeds yet. And then he said, talk about the rattlesnake story. And I said, do you know a story about a rattlesnake? She says, no. And I said, it's something to do with a gun, shooting a rattlesnake. She said, I don't know it. And I said, he says someone will know it. So you will be able to validate that story later. And the beauty of it is, because she didn't know the story, if we can get it validated, that shows any skeptic, I'm not just reading her mind because she's thinking all about poor Uncle Jim who's about to die. This is a golden opportunity to show that the soul is actively communicating at all times, whether or not it's in a body. So Jim passed just about a day or two later. And oh, by the way, when he was talking to me in that reading, he gave me another name, Paul. And Cheryl said, oh, Paul's my ex-boyfriend. And I said, well, let's see if we can get your current love of your life on the other side. And he came through beautifully. I don't know, I never heard from this Paul, but her lover came through, and it was a beautiful reunion, and the reading was over. Uncle Jim did pass a day or so later. I love this story. She went to Jim's wife, And she said, do you know some story about shooting a rattlesnake? She said, I don't know anything about it. She said, but maybe his brother knows it. And she went, oh my God, Uncle Paul. Paul was her ex-boyfriend, but it was also Jim's brother. So she went to Paul. It's very confusing keeping all these names straight. She went to Paul and she said, do you know some story with Uncle Jim about shooting a rattlesnake? And he said, oh my God, do I ever. In fact, it's one of the funniest stories we used to tell. When we were kids, the two of us and our other brother, Larry, used to go hunting for rattlesnakes. And we went out and we found one in the desert. It was 3 feet of its tail sticking out of a prairie dog hole. And we drew straws, get this, to see who would be the one to grab the tail by its snake and pull it out of the hole. And poor Larry, who always won everything, got the short stick on that one. And he grabs the tail of the snake, pulls it out, and the other two go bang, 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 and shoot this snake. It's a terrible vision. I'm sorry, it's church, but you know. But this is the thing. He said, Cheryl, we haven't told that story in decades. And now that Jim has passed, there's not another living soul on this earth who knows that story. And look at the story. This soul who's still in a body, but in hospice, who will never speak through a physical body again, chose to show, this is me. I'm talking to you. And here's the message that he came through to share. He said, I want my family to know as they look at my body there in hospice, that I may look like I'm suffering, but I'm just fine. What a message for all of us. How many of us have watched loved ones whose bodies deteriorate, but the soul is fine? Alzheimer's, dementia, all those kinds of things that make the body not work properly anymore. I've brought through so many souls who have suffered from those illnesses, and they told me, I was playing on the other side the whole time. So very comforting. So what that tells me is we have 2 points of view. Again, the story or the soul. And we get to choose which one we tell. Now this can lead to a lot of opportunities for us, the point of view we choose to take. I did a reading for a woman just about a month ago. I was told, you have to do this reading for her. She had a daughter on the other side. This woman was a counselor, a trained counselor. She's been to India and studied in ashrams, so a very spiritual person. We sat down and I asked her daughter to draw near, and she did. I was immediately able to describe symptoms of how she passed, her personality to a T. And then she started to describe to me separation with her husband, challenges with the husband, and some real friction with the husband and her mom. All of this validated by her mom. Then I was shown this big stone resting on her mom's heart. And a lot of teaching came from that Mom, you are going to have physical heart problems unless you forgive the husband for what happened. And a lot of teaching came after that. And I hoped that it sank in with my client. Well, about a week later, she emailed me. And she said, Suzanne, I've been listening over and over to the recording of our session. And I have to tell you, that I just can't forgive her husband. I read that and I went, oh, I thought we didn't get through to her. But then I read on. She actually wrote, I just can't forgive her husband when I remain stuck in the story. In my story and his story. But the teaching that came through in that session showed that it's when we rise above the story and unite as the light that we are, then we see everything with a whole different point of view. Yes. So forgiveness is quite easy from this level. Down here, we all have our different viewpoints, and there are things that we can forgive and things that we can't forgive, but there's always a lesson in the story. So I'm talking a lot about point of view here. And how do we get our 2 points of view aligned? Well, we do that through our soul's growth. Our soul is always pushing us, tune into the heart. That's where the soul aligns with the story. Do you notice the cross here? It's just the center point here. When we're out of alignment, we're out of balance. And we just have to turn that story into alignment with our true self. And we find that peace. So it's funny, if you're familiar with military people, you know that we like acronyms, okay? So point of view, the story versus the soul, is POV. And when I realized that the other day, I started to laugh, because in the Navy, when we would fill out forms when we were going overseas, if you were going to ship your car, are you going to ship your POV or not? That's your personally owned vehicle, privately owned vehicle. And I thought it was kind of funny that we get to choose our point of view, story or soul, and this is our POV for the soul. This body that we all carry around is our privately owned vehicle of the soul. And if we can come into alignment, then we find peace. So I got to laughing on the way down here, because suddenly the perfect analogy to talk about aligning the POV came into view. Just a few days ago, my husband Ty said, "What are you doing today?" And I said, "Well, I'm working on that talk for unity." I didn't need to put any time into it at all, actually, because they've got me covered. And that day turned out to be the story, in that we have a car that we tow behind this bus that we take on the road 6 months of the year to share the messages of hope. And the car's been getting noisier and noisier and noisier over the past few years. It's a 2012 SUV. And compared to our other car, it's just, you can't even talk over the noise. So Ty said, "Why don't we just go look at cars?" And we had determined that this car is one of the few models you can tow behind a bus without modifying it. So we really didn't want a new privately owned vehicle. Well, we spent the day looking at SUVs, and man, they're quiet. But they also cost like $45,000. And we think, do we really need a new car just because it's noisy? So we go home and we're going to think about this for a while. And so Ty says, "I have an idea." And the next day, he takes our SUV to the garage. He gets 2 new tires put on the back, and he gets them aligned. He gets back in the car, and with our POV now aligned, it's quiet again. So a simple alignment cut down the noise in our POV, and we just saved $45,000. It's like, thank you for that analogy, but here's the real deal. This is what really got to me. It suddenly occurred to me that to get the really quiet car, you gotta pay a little extra and get the limited edition. But see, it's the limited edition here that's the noisy one. When we focus on our so-called limited self in a body, we're missing out on the fullness of our limitless self, which is pure light, which is spirit. This is the very important point I want to leave you with. It's not either or. You're not either in a body or you're a soul that you step into when you cross the veil. I hope my story with Uncle Jim has helped you to see you are that beautiful light now, and all it takes to align the two is the awareness of who and what you are, a beautiful light now. Do this. I sometimes walk through the store, a grocery store, and I'll do this little motion, and people must think I'm a crazy person. But these tools bring us into alignment, cut down the noise of separation. On one level, yes, we appear to be separate beings. At another level, our eternal level, from which we come, which we are in right now, and to which we return, we are the limitless edition. Thank you. Hey. Thank you.